researching for our film, we needed to develop lots of certain things. Like when we went to the BFI, I particularly thought what was important was how films had developed through the ages of time, and we needed to take that into account. So, particularly for modern films, they took into account depth of field, and this is evident with our film by having Josh in the straitjacket scene, as he has the fall, which is the red light beaming down on him, Josh in the midground with the actual straitjacket over, and the black being the background, so that it creates a tense and quite scary atmosphere. It was important to appreciate what we needed to be in the genre, especially for psychological thriller. We used a straitjacket because it links to the craziness and the psychological problems that may have, and it's used in films like Hannibal, which have the same theme. The importance of a narrative for our film was including a protagonist and seeing him go through a journey, particularly that we have him go through a time lapse to show that time passes. We did this by showing the family videos of him as a child to him as a teenager. We also needed to create a climax for the audience so that they're on the edge. This will help create tension. This is particularly done when he's finished his monologue and says boo and snaps into the other scene. It's an anticlimax because we think that we don't really know what's going to happen, and then he ends up in his bed, so it was all a dream sort of thing, and it allows us to connect to the character. To start off, for the introduction of our company name, we used Dark Star by Tom Stark, which uses a lot of violins in a low tone. This allowed us to create tension and crescendoed throughout the piece to create a tense atmosphere. This is non-diegetic because it's an orchestral piece of music. In fact, it's a sound bridge as the music carries on from the introduction of the company name to the actual title of the film, and this is done to show the type of theme and the type of tensity that's going in the film. In fact, the letters were edited to be in sync with the emphasized beats of the music, creating tension because the audience will then expect a climax when getting to the last letter, but will be highly disappointed. This was important for our audience, particularly for psychological, because we want them to expect something but take it away. We also use black and white when editing for our sequences because we thought that it would stand out, and this was evident with our questionnaire, as when we asked our audience what colour would be effective, they chose white. So we thought that using black and white would contrast well. The editing is also at a 4x4 beat, so means it's at a steady pace. This allows the audience to stay involved and create intensity. Also, we used phasing out to highlight the end of the sequence to start the film, and this dramatically shows how our film was about to begin. We then use a montage editing, particularly showing memories of Josh as a child. This was important to show the audience how Josh is a lovable character in a quick and snappy way so that they personally get to know him without having to go through a whole 16 years about it. We wanted to create a handheld camera effect so that it became more personal and felt real, because families wouldn't have had precise and clean shots when filming memories. Also, the use of having a bucket and spades and a water fountain flower highlighted that it was children's toys, making him enthusiastically play around and look happy as a child. And this was important as we needed this to contrast with him when in the straitjacket. We also made the footage of the boy Bram a brown colour grade to show that the footage was older, so that the audience could at least answer a few questions about the character, because at this point they didn't know who was speaking in the voiceover. Also, the use of a voiceover became sinister because we didn't know who it was. We had no idea. And with the tone of voice being quiet and having no emotion behind it, made it uncomfortable and very sinister. This, in fact, was a studio sound, so that the audience could listen to the descriptive detail from the dialogue and how this character is so negative. In fact, it juxtaposes with the footage of the child because of the negative persona behind it. Also, the use of the music sounding like a heartbeat made it very intense. We also see three shots of the child, which means we become comfortable and aware that he is there. This is why we use the motivated cut, so the audience can become used to the child and get used to his happiness. However, it's a shock horror when they are shown to a teenager in a straitjacket, and obviously because they are familiar and know the voice, they will know that the boy has grown up and this is what he's now become, which makes the audience feel more sympathetic, allowing us to follow the typical conventions of having a likable character. We used a wipe shot at the end of the montage of the boy to show how it slowly and sadly has turned into this. The straitjacket was important because it highlighted his craziness and whatever. But we wanted to show this by using high angles so that the audience had more power and could see how belittled this character was, and see how someone would have more power with somebody over a straitjacket. We also used multiple long shots so we could see the character lying on the ground and showed he was unable to escape. This creates tension. We then used a continuous pan to show the full length of the boy being trapped. This meant that we could show the full costume and the full room and show how there's nothing to look at except him, and he is the main focus, he is the midground. The black in the room emphasised him being alone and that dark things had occurred in his time for him to be here. This then, as a viewer, doesn't distract us from the background. The dialogue progressively gets darker, which creates a narrative climax of what will happen. The slow fade out will show that we can take our time, as he has nowhere to go. Also, the use of a tracking shot, particularly going from back to forward into a close-up of his face, finally shows the face of the character and shows how this little boy has turned into a teenager, which is then a shock when he opens it, especially with the black tint on his eyes, shows that he's not the lovable boy anymore, and answers the question of whether the boy is alive or not whilst looking at him. This is important for us to do because we need to, as a psychological thriller, create intensity. We also use a lot of sound effects, particularly for his dream sequence, to show how he is not in control and about to go quite mental, particularly when we use the crescendo, as it becomes more and more uncomfortable for the audience to listen to. It follows the typical conventions as it uses cliffhangers. Each chapter should end with an ultimate cliffhanger. There's nothing like a stunning shock, which is in particular when we come out of the scene and going in and showing him waking up, and from him going from his childhood to him being in a straitjacket. We have developed from our preliminary by using a variety of shots like close-ups to see the reactions of a character more effectively, using different angles to show the status of a character. Particularly the pan I thought was effective, as we got to see and emphasize the costume of the straitjacket, allowing us to see what the character looks like due to posture, and help indicate his class, age, and the way he can be represented, instead of having a straight shot. Waking up from the side to see the full character, particularly the long shot, allowed our audience to see more and how the character can be more effective instead of just having reaction shots. Also, we changed location because we thought in our initial piece that it was too boring and that the audience would become dissatisfied with the characters being in the same place. But allowing us to while showing the audience the dark room, the house of where he played as a child, and the bed that he wakes up in, it creates a more of a life story and creates more depth behind the character. We also thought about using more costume and how it could suit a scene and actually help set the setting. So the use of a straitjacket can represent that something bad has occurred and foreshadow in fact, instead of the other two were just in their school uniform, which didn't really suit the scene. Also, we wanted to highlight the casting process, which we took a lot more seriously, because when we did the initial film, it should have been for two 30-year-old men, and then we were using students. We did this by realizing if we had a younger guy, it would become more of an appeal for our 12A audience. Also, using the tripod steadily allowed us to create more shots, especially for our tracking shot, as we needed to move back and forward to create the effect that the audience were watching over him, especially with the high angle, because it made Josh look belittled and show the status of the character at that point. Using sound effects like music.com and having all the crazy sounds from when his dream can create a scary effect and create an environment. It can also create tension and help set the tone of the film, particularly with soundtracks, because they can crescendo and create more of an enigma. And the use of sound effects can create the world of the character, allow us to hear what they hear. Also, the use of a close-up reaction of characters can allow us to see their reactions. Whilst the editing has more of an initiative and more of a reason to do it, because we were using subjective treatment, we needed to make sure that the editing had a reason to. So using motivated cuts and jump cuts created a tense effect instead of just constantly using wipe. Also, this was important because it created different paces for our film.